Hi, I'm Stephen.
And I'm Celine from the Cult Hackers podcast.
So I'm a former member of a high control group, otherwise known as a cult, who left when I was about 30. That's about the time my daughter was born. That's you, Celine.
We explore what it's like to be in a cult and leave one. We interview former members and leading cult experts. And we also talk about the long journey of making sense of the world afterwards.
Yeah, that's a journey that you've witnessed and helped me with.
I'm a media graduate interested in the place cults have in our society.
And I'm an organisational psychologist these days with an interest in leadership and who also studies cults and cultic groups.
There's a new episode every week where we look at cults from every angle and attempt to crack the cult code.
So search for Cult Hackers on your favourite podcast app and catch up with us every Saturday.
Hello listeners and welcome to this week's mini-series on Qanon. I'm your speaker Casey and this is the Cult Vault podcast. I'm releasing part 1 of this series on January the 6th, which is a key date in terms of this topic. The Proud Boys, according to Britannica.com, are a neo-fascist white nationalist organisation established in 2016. The group's members were noted for their misogynistic and anti-Semitic rhetoric, their support for former US President Donald Trump, and for their propensity for street violence. Britannica.com also states that the Oath Keepers are a far-right American militia group that adheres to a conspiracy-focused anti-government worldview. But what do these two groups have in common other than their extreme beliefs? Well, they were both present during the now historical event that took place on January the 6th, 2020. Known as the January 6th insurrection, the storming of Capitol Hill included violent mobs of Trump supporters rallying together at Trump's encouragement to stop Joe Biden from being declared the new president. Claims that the election was stolen had been filtering through online spaces for weeks leading up to this event, with Trump spouting it during public appearances and conspiracy theory boards running wild with accusations of vote tampering from the Democrats. The terror attack saw many groups involved, but all were aligned in their support for Donald J. Trump. The Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys, the 3%ers were all there in support of this man, taking part in violent actions against the Capitol in his name, and those inside it. 6 people died that day, with 4 more critically injured. Included amongst those involved were self-proclaimed QAnon members. But what is QAnon? How did events escalate to the point of terrorism? And has there been any justice since? Journalist, writer and conspiracy theory debunker Mike Rothschild is here to talk us through all of this step by step. In part 1, we look at the subject of conspiracy theories, discussing some relevant to QAnon. We discuss Mike's work, including his recent book publication, The Storm is Upon Us, how QAnon became a movement, cult and conspiracy theory of everything. And in part 2, we discuss QAnon, the history, the events, the tangents, the lot, in detail. For early access to full-length and ad-free episodes, please visit patreon.com/thecultvault and join from as little as £1 a month. Now, here is Mike Rothschild. So hello, Mike, and welcome to the show. I've been a fan of your work for quite some time now, and after reading your recent publication regarding the QAnon movement, titled The Storm is Upon Us, How QAnon Became a Movement, Cult and Conspiracy Theory of Everything, I realised that you would be a great person to discuss this entire movement with. Would you like to start by introducing yourself to the listeners?
Sure. Hello, listeners. My name is Mike Rothschild, and I am a journalist and author, and I focus on conspiracy theories, hoaxes, scams, frauds, moral panics, and anything your aunt posts about on Facebook without having read it first.
Oh, wow. That sounds... Yeah, I can think of a few people that come to my mind on my own Facebook page when you say that.
Yeah.
And before we get into the questions, can I just ask you, Rothschild, is it a pen name or is it your actual last name?
It is my actual last name. Yeah, I'm not related to the banking family, but that is my next book is about the Rothschild banking family conspiracy theory movement and sort of how it started in the early 1800s and how it still is impacting how we see Jewish wealth and power today. Unfortunately, anti-Semitism is never completely out of the news, but it is definitely more in the news now. So look for that in probably fall of 2023. I'm just putting the finishing touches on it.
Oh my goodness. That's really exciting. I wonder if people will think that you are like a disgruntled family member writing about the Rothschild family.
What's funny is that when I started the process of putting the pitch together for the book, my book agent asked, let's make sure that we can get access to them, because I was talking about, I really want to speak to them and see sort of how these theories have impacted their life. They don't talk about this stuff at all. They very rarely give interviews in general. And when they do, it tends to be about, the pastimes of the idle rich, the wine and the art and the fine food and all that stuff. But they don't publicly talk about the myths because talking about this stuff would force them to prove a negative. They would have to prove that they do not own 80% of the world's wealth, or that they have not, funded both sides of every war since the American Revolution. And of course, you can't do that. It's the job of the person making the accusation to prove it, but that's not really how things work on the internet. So they really just don't say anything about it at all. There's one exception, and I write about this in the book, is David de Rothschild is one of the English Rothschild heirs. In 2007, I believe he went on InfoWars. I don't know why, and I don't know how that happened, but it is about as contentious and awkward as two men shouting at each other for 40 minutes can possibly be.
So he didn't ease himself into going onto the BBC couch and having a conversation about conspiracy theories. He went onto InfoWars.
He was talking about his book about the dangers of climate change. And, obviously that's a very important subject. But to go on the show of Alex Jones, who thinks that climate change is a scam designed by the UN to sell carbon credits, I just sort of don't quite know how that happened, except maybe they're all just so insulated that just no one knew who he was. I don't know. I'd love to live in a world where I didn't know who Alex Jones was. And I thought, oh, sure, it's just another interview. He's popular. So, yeah, it's a lot. But, yeah, it's been an interesting subject because I haven't been able to approach it in the same way that I approach QAnon, which is, talk to people involved with it, talk to experts about it. With the Rothschilds, they're so walled off. And of course, so many of the people who perpetrated all of these myths are long dead. So what I've been doing is going to the primary sources, which are these old books, old pamphlets, crank newsletters, self-published broadsides from the 1890s. And a lot of this stuff is out there, but you have to do a little bit of digging to find it. And I really enjoyed that part of the process.
I think that comes across in your writing as well. What I absolutely loved about The Storm is Upon Us is that you offer a very simplistic chronology of the implementation and birth of QAnon, how it's changed subtly, and all of the kind of branches and chapters of the group that now exist in different parts of the world, where it's most prominent, key figures in those movements. But it's not overwhelming, because I think if you try and explain QAnon to somebody in sort of like a Wikipedia summary style, right, it's not possible. People are like, I don't understand how anybody could believe any of this stuff. Right. And of course, what your book does is offer us some insight into that, along with QAnon individuals or believers and those that have loved ones that are wrapped up in the movement itself. So really just giving us all those perspectives. And I'll keep talking the book up throughout this episode. And I will definitely make sure that we point listeners towards where they can get copies for themselves. So you're not part of the Rothschild banking family, but there's a book coming out about it soon, which is great. How did you get into the world of journalism and writing?
Sure. So I've always been a writer. I wrote plays. I've written some screenplays, of course, things that, didn't go anywhere. But I also have always been fascinated by conspiracy theories and fringe culture and sort of the weird stuff that people believe. When I was in college, I got really into Coast to Coast AM, the Art Bell overnight radio show, where he would talk about UFOs and crop circles and cattle mutilations and angels and JFK. And it was very much, he had a very humane approach to the people who believed it. It wasn't like, oh, you're so dumb, how could you believe this? It also wasn't uncritical acceptance of it. It was trying to unpack what about this stands up to scrutiny. And I always really admired that approach and that sort of skeptical, but also willing to kind of go where things take you. And it was also, it was about stuff that people just didn't talk about. I didn't know anyone who was into things like UFOs or the face on Mars or any of that stuff. It just wasn't like, that was for crazy people. And what I learned from listening to a lot of Coast to Coast AM was that these aren't crazy people. I mean, some of them maybe need some help, but a lot of these people are just looking for an explanation, looking for reasons why things are the way they are, and looking for other people who believe the same things, because probably the people in their lives don't want to hear about it. And we are dealing with that only much more so right now. People are like, oh, are we, more prone to conspiracy theories than ever? And I don't think we are. But what we have now, what we didn't even have maybe 15 years ago, is the community aspect of it. You found conspiracy theories on message boards or like Yahoo groups, but this wasn't popular. This wasn't stuff that everybody was talking about. And they were very siloed. The people who believed in the wellness stuff were not also JFK people. And now it's like with QAnon and with the pandemic, it's like everybody believes everything. So we're now at this point where the stuff that I was getting into and kind of getting really interested in, it seems almost quaint to where we are now.
And listening to your chat with Clint Haycock, who is a friend of the show and also an incredibly insightful mind in terms of Christianity, right-wing extremism, nationalism, and QAnon itself, he started his conversation with you by asking, what's the difference between a conspiracy and a conspiracy theory? Because that's quite key when it comes to looking at QAnon as a whole.
Sure. And it's a really important question. And one of those things that people ask me a lot and it sort of gets passed around is like, oh, what conspiracy theories are true? And I say, well, there is not a popularly believed conspiracy theory that has later turned out to be true. But there are many, many conspiracies. A conspiracy is just people working together to do something secretly. The assassination of Julius Caesar or Abraham Lincoln. Those were conspiracies. The tobacco companies working together to hide the effects of their product. That's a conspiracy. Pharmaceutical companies working to hide, side effects of their medications. That's a conspiracy. They don't have to be sort of shadowy and involving like robes and rituals. It's just, what do we want hidden from people and how can we make more money and or get rid of the people we don't like? That's what a conspiracy is. And it's not sort of, we put explosives in the Twin Towers for 40 years and nobody figured it out. It's, here's a report that says something bad about what we sell. We're just going to bury it.
So a conspiracy theory is a wild idea that can't be proven because it's highly unlikely to be true.
Right. It's too complicated to be true. Something like chemtrails, it involves too many people, too many things would have to go right, too many people would have to keep secrets. And so many of the things that we blame on conspiracy theories are just people being bad at their jobs or corrupt or greedy or all three.
I said to my partner one time when I was looking into a conspiracy theory myself was something along the lines of, it's a set of really unfortunate circumstances that all happened to play out around the same time, which makes people think that it's credible that a plane has been flown to a part of the world that nobody knows about because of an ongoing war, when the chances are it's actually probably just at the bottom of the ocean somewhere.
Right. And people like to say, well, there's no such thing as coincidences. Well, of course there are. Two unrelated things happening. I mean, that happens all the time. But what we find in things like QAnon and in cultic movements are people explaining things that feel like they need an explanation. We can't accept that things are just random or happenstance, or that we don't have any control over what happens to us. We want to have control, or we want someone to have control, even if it's a dark, malevolent force that we can't do anything about. At least someone is in charge. It's not just random bad luck or happenstance, and that's very comforting to people.
How often do you hear of a new conspiracy? Is it or conspiracy theory? Is it a daily thing or a weekly thing? When I speak with cult experts, they tell me that they are told about new groups in various parts of the world almost every single day. Is this something that is true in your line of work?
It is hour by hour at this point. I try to log off on weekends and like times when I'm traveling, and then I'll come back and it's like I missed 10 things. It starts almost always with somebody misinterpreting something and then running with that as if they have the explanation, and not bothering to wait to see what actually happened. And this happens to the far left, the far right. I mean, this is any event that happens in the world, someone is going to run with it as if they know what actually happened, when I don't know what happened is always a good explanation. It's always a perfectly acceptable explanation for something that's going on. Just let's wait to find out more. Let's see what really happened here. But people don't want to do that. They just want to wrap things up into the narrative that they wrap everything else up into.
Something that keeps popping up on my social media feeds and my Reddit feed as well at the moment is all of this stuff happening with Balenciaga. So
Yes.
I'm sure that you've heard some stuff about this in regards to the photo shoot that the company did that included two children holding teddy bears that were wearing supposed bondage like attire on the teddy bears themselves. The kids were holding the teddy bears, and there's this wildfire that spread around the world accusing the company of pandering to predators and child abusers, because there's some books and some carefully placed objects in the photo that people have discovered that is supposed to be kind of like a nod to that darker community. Is this something you've been reading up on?
Yeah, and it's funny because it happened while I was traveling for Thanksgiving in the US, and it was one of those things where I was trying not to spend much time on social media, and then I logged on. I'm like, what? Why are people talking about this? What's going on? And I saw the pictures. It's very similar to what happened with Pizzagate. It's very similar to the whole Wayfair thing from a couple of years ago, where people found these Wayfair cabinets that supposedly had kids' names, and they were selling for $50,000, and like, oh, those are the children being trafficked, and you can just buy children on Wayfair. I think a lot of, and I don't know all of the details of sort of all of the different things that people have found in the pictures, and they don't really matter because they're not there. But what you have here is some spectacularly bad taste, and people who really truly should have known better to maybe just don't put kids in a situation where you could even hint at bondage or pornography. Just don't do that. Do something else. Put them smiling on a playground, or just do something that doesn't involve kids at all. And it's one of those things where, like we were just talking about, this is not a public signaling to pedophiles. Because that's not how this stuff works. These people hide. They don't broadcast what they do. This is just somebody who took this picture just screwed up, and somebody who allowed it to be printed and screwed up. Like, people should be fired over this, but this is not a sort of pedophilic ritual. This is just people being dumb.
I feel as though the threads that are coming out about the whole thing as well fit with a lot of the stuff that people with the QAnon belief system will repost or get involved with as well. Do you feel like that's a true enough statement to make?
Definitely. Yeah. This is the kind of thing where Q people are just going to get all over this because they think they're fighting for children. They're trying to save the children. I tend to think that the people that we need to save children from people who want to violently save children, that's a real danger to kids. I mean, kids get kidnapped in QAnon-driven custody disputes. This has nothing to do with fashion or art or photography. The real abusers, the real ones who are hurting kids, they're not doing this. They're not signaling this way. But the Q people, they want to feel important. They want to feel like they're fighting back against the evildoers. So they jump on something like this as an example of, oh, there are pedophiles everywhere and they're hiding in plain sight. Well, no, they're actually not. And you're making it harder to catch the people who actually do things like this. You're not helping. And the more you think you are, the more you're actually hindering this effort.
Mm-hmm. I think actually thinking about it now, there is a way that conspiracy theory itself could be nuanced to say it's not happening in this way, but it is happening in like isolated cult-like environments that are away from the public eye, where children are raised in environments where they're not allowed to, see the outside world.
Right.
So, there is a way, I think, to further the conversation around abusers and where they might be hiding. And in turn just kind of say, but it's not here.
Right. And that kind of spotlighting the abuse that happens in cult-like movements or in large abusive families that are dialed into very extreme religion, that doesn't get clicks. That doesn't help you sell, sweatshirts and Substack subscriptions. That's doing the actual work of helping people who are being abused, and that's not lucrative enough. And these people view QAnon and these other movements as a business. And I talk about this a lot in the book, how much money is being made off of this. And it's not about helping anybody. It's about, your brand. And if it's about your brand, then you're not really helping anybody.
I suppose I should just ask all the questions and let you run with it. What is QAnon? How did it start? How has it changed? What potential is there for offline harm, or has that already happened? What hand did QAnon have in the events that unfolded on January the 6th? And all of that stuff that comes with the big subject itself.
Sure. And I never want to assume that anybody knows anything about QAnon, and I envy people who don't. But so QAnon started in October of 2017, and it started on the image board 4chan. And an image board it's like a message board, but it's primarily for pictures and for memes and for GIFs and things like that. And there's a tradition of these kinds of trolling things on 4chan, and some of them are really harmless. Things like Rickrolling came from 4chan, lolcats came from 4chan. It's not all anti-Semitic pornography, but there are places where it is all anti-Semitic pornography. And QAnon started in one of those places, and it was the latest in a line of anonymous truth tellers who would show up on 4chan and pretend to have insider access to the White House or the FBI or military intelligence. There was an MI5 insider who claimed they were dialed into British intelligence. I mean, none of these people have any kind of access like that, because people who have access like that don't leak it on 4chan. But QAnon was another one of these people, and they started calling themselves Q Clearance Patriot. There is an actual Q clearance. It's a Department of Energy term that's involved with nuclear energy. It has nothing to do with military intelligence. I know people just in my own life who have Q clearance, and they're like, yeah, it's not that exciting. So the person who called themselves Q Clearance Patriot started posting a series of kind of almost bits of a story that Hillary Clinton was about to be arrested. And this was in the end of October 2017. And there was this whole story about Hillary is on the run. Her passport's been flagged. She's going to be arrested. Her inner circle is going to be arrested. There's going to be riots when all of this happens. The Marines and the National Guard are going to be deployed to quell the unrest. President Trump's going to be up in the air. There's going to be a vast purging of the deep state. It's going to be announced on Twitter, and the 1,000 years of deep state cabal control of Western society is all going to end. And you're going to know about it first because you've been reading these posts. And it was leading up to this great mass arrest at the beginning of November. Of course, there was this conspiracy theory going around at the time that there was going to be an Antifa uprising in the first week of November, that like Antifa super soldiers were going to get secret codes and go door to door killing Trump supporters. I mean, just crazy stuff. And then this deadline comes and nothing happens. And Q, by this point, it actually started to pick up a following. And those first few Q posts on 4chan were like, what is this? This is stupid. But then the story kept going, and it started to get picked up by a few very minor influencers. And I think that people really ran with it because it was about Hillary Clinton being arrested. And, the Clintons, and Hillary in particular, have driven this conspiracy theory industrial complex in the US for 3 decades, go all the way back to the early 90s. And they look at her as this, master criminal who kills anybody who gets in her way. And she's finally going to get what's coming to her. And I think very quickly, the person or the people writing the Q posts realized that they really hit on something here. They'd figured out a way to get past the kind of cynical trolling of 4chan and tell a story that had a little bit of a wider appeal. And it just kept going and going and going after that. And it really continued on until December of 2020, when the last Q posts for now, when those happened, and it was clear that Biden was going to be inaugurated, like the Q story couldn't go anywhere after that. So it really had to change. So the Q movement by that point became very much about sort of asking questions and, what are they telling us? And the media is lying to you, and the COVID experts are lying to you. So it's very much a general sort of just asking questions movement. And it's gotten much more popular as it has sanded off a lot of the stuff that made QAnon really unique. They don't really use the hashtags and the catchphrases and the slogans anymore. But now you've got people all over the world at the very highest levels of government and industry and entertainment who believe this crap, or at least believe some of the things that Q has spouted, even if they don't know anything about Q. So that's the very long-winded and rambling answer.
Thought that I had when I was I listened to the audio book, which is great if anybody decides to go on Audible and listen to the audio book of The Storm is Upon Us. Something that was written in the book itself had me thinking, those people that are at least telling others that they believe parts of the Q movement, people in high levels of government, people that are elected officials, do you think that they truly believe it, or that they recognize that there's a substantial community there that they can deploy or keep on side to but then I worry that I'm falling into my own conspiracy theories of like how people are trying to just weaponize people's belief systems, basically.
Yeah, it's an extremely important question, and it's also a question that really is unanswerable, which is frustrating. You never really know what somebody believes. You can't, that can't be measured, because that's something that only that person knows. But what you can measure are what they say and what they do and the things they put out into the world. And I happen to think, and I know a lot of other journalists and researchers have this stance as well, is that if you're putting out QAnon material, if you're sharing Q drops, if you're talking about the same things, how the election was stolen and the deep state is real and COVID was created in a biolab and funded by Soros. If you're talking about that stuff, I don't have any reason to think you don't believe it. You're putting it out there to the world as if it's real. So me doubting that you believe it is almost like giving that person too much credit. One of the things I do in the book is I try to trace the sort of pre-QAnon social media footprint of a couple of the bigger influencers. And their pre-QAnon social media is all the same thing. It's all Jewish power and the deep state and the Hollywood elites and the occult pedophiles. Q is just another way of telling that story. So they believe it, or they talk themselves into believing it, because you can't fake this stuff for too long without it just being really obvious. And I think a case of it being sort of obvious that they're not completely on board is Alex Jones. If you listen to enough InfoWars, you can tell he's acting. When he goes into these rants and he's screaming and he's bellowing about how they're all going to murder us and I got to be prepared to eat my neighbors. This is a character. This is a persona. But at the same time, I think he believes a lot of this stuff, and you can't convince people that it's real if you don't think it's real on some level.
When you were looking at the demographic of individuals that have the Q belief system, or at least some aspects of it, there's kind of a scale that you go into in the book that talks about how some people might just believe fragments or small parts of it, and then there are people at the other end who will buy into the whole thing, which is pretty substantial when you break it all down and look at how many components are involved. And just as it is with victims and survivors of cultic abuse, and just as you mentioned with the radio show that was sensitive towards individuals who were coming to talk about their beliefs in things like crop circles and UFOs, there's not any type of person that can find themselves being victimized by a belief system in this way. But you do give some identifying markers of individuals that you've spoken with, and some things that they might be going through in their life that make them more susceptible to something like the QAnon movement.
Yeah, there is no one demographic of people who believe QAnon or really any conspiracy theory. It's not just it's not the stereotype that we have. It's not people who are dumb. It's not people who are poor. It's not people who are drug addicts or racists. Some of them are some of those things, but the biggest commonality for people who believe in a conspiracy theory like QAnon is already believing in conspiracy theories. If you are already a person who thinks that 9/11 was a staged false flag and that Hillary Clinton is a killer and pharmaceutical companies want to poison us, QAnon is just another rung on that ladder. There's nothing there keeping you from believing that. But very few people just wake up one day and decide to start believing in QAnon. It's the looking for answers. It's the looking for explanations. And the sort of classic thing that drives conspiracy movements and extremism, which is scapegoating. You're looking for somebody to blame. Somebody did this to you. If your life is not where you thought it would be, if your business hasn't done well, or if you feel like you've been ostracized socially because, I can't tell the jokes I used to tell, and I can't use these words I used to use, and I have to put up with trans people having rights. You take it personally and you feel like you're being attacked and you want to push back at it. And so much of the appeal of QAnon is we're going to push back against this kind of godless liberal progressivism, and we're going to reinstitute good Christian values when men were in control and women were subservient, and all this culture war stuff that just Americans just obsess over. These are all drivers of people into QAnon. The grievance, the blame, the anger, and the feeling like everybody is lying to you.
And I suppose in the same way that some individuals may find themselves becoming involved in a cultic environment later on in life through a transitional period or
Sure.
disenchantment. You mentioned that some of the individuals you spoke with who had family members involved or were once believers themselves were people that were divorced or empty nesters, and individuals who are perhaps seeking that community or like-mindedness. So in trying to answer the question, is QAnon a cult, which you do so well in the book,
Thank you.
There's so many different parallels that you can look at and say, well, I can see why you might say that when you consider the individuals that find themselves going further and further down the rabbit hole, slowly through the funnel, which is exactly what happens with individuals when they join groups. They're not just told about Xenu, on the first personality test when they walk through the doors of a Scientology building. So I think that that's really important to highlight as well. And something else that was just so well done was looking at the belief system itself of QAnon and how it's just not original in any way.
Right.
And I wondered if you could give us some examples of how QAnon has taken like tidbits from history and historical conspiracy theories and sort of mashed them all together to create this super conspiracy theory.
Sure. And one of the things I wanted to do with the book is kind of disabuse people of the notion that this is new, that this is like, we've never gone through something like QAnon before. It's new in some ways, but in many, many more ways, it's very old. And the component parts of it go, all the way from the blood libel in the Middle Ages against, Jewish communities, supposedly, ritually killing Christian children. I mean, this is stuff that's still passed around today. All the way through the protocols of the Elders of Zion, to the Satanic Panic, to Pizzagate, but then these currency scams of the 90s and the aughts, and they're still going on. This one that I write about quite a bit, Nasara, is like there's like a whole new generation of people who believe in this. And they really believe that there is this secret war going on to suppress the vast riches that will be foisted upon them, and the secret cures and the secret free energy. There is a utopian strain to a lot of this. And I think with something like QAnon, I think a lot of people want to lump it in with like accelerationism and this kind of nihilistic extremism. And it really isn't that. It is much more utopian. It's much more, we're going to get everything that we want. We're going to have peace and freedom and justice. We just need to kill all these people first. And there is a strain of that in the kind of the 19th and early 20th century utopian movements as well. And I think QAnon really draws on that. This idea of we need to make everything better by just getting rid of the people at the bottom. And we'll be doing them a favor by putting them out of their misery, and then we'll be better. I mean, something like eugenics it's very much about making things better for the chosen few, and QAnon very much taps into things like that. So it is this mixture of kind of classic conspiracy theory mongering. There are a lot of pop culture references in QAnon, a lot of movie references, which is funny for a movement that thinks Hollywood is full of cultic pedophiles. They have no problem stealing from The Matrix or from Fight Club or from The Godfather. So it's really this crazy gumbo of all these different conspiracies, all these different tropes and scams, and you put a social media sheen on it and you present it as if it's something brand new, but all the component parts are just stuff we've dealt with before and have to keep dealing with over and over.
Also things that have been misinterpreted with things like the catchphrase, where we go one, we go all, which right. I was actually found myself stopping my kind of housework at that point when you were going through the origins of where that saying actually came from. And then there was one quote that I wrote down that said, QAnon doesn't live up to scrutiny at any level. So I wondered whether you were going to actually offer us your personal thoughts on whether you think any parts of QAnon are true. And then you just go through and completely debunk the whole thing in a really great way, in a way that I could go and look at everything you've said and prove it myself or disprove it myself. And I think that that's really important, because when you have proven conspiracies like MK Ultra, and then you have conspiracy theories being so-called or somewhat proven or justified by conspiracies that exist, and then the difficulty discerning fact from fiction in terms of the saying where we go one, we go all, for example, that's not accurate. The way that it's used by the QAnon movement, it's not as you explained to us. It's so difficult. You said at the start about one of the British Rothschild family members going on to InfoWars, and how no one else has spoken out from the family about it because they would have to prove the negative. But then, of course, even if they did that, everything that they would say would be twisted and turned into proving that they are actually doing all of the things that the conspiracy theorists say they are. So that, I think, is fundamentally the most difficult part of individuals that are involved in a conspiracy theory belief system, is that you're not able to have that logical conversation or discern fact from fiction, or say, like, I can show you this paper trail of why all these things aren't true.
Yeah, it's the people who need to hear it the most, that they are being conned, that they are being exploited, that they're being lied to. They're the ones who are most apt to think that you are lying to them, that you are exploiting them, that you think they're crazy. And it makes it so that you do sort of question, like, what am I doing this for? Like, who is this supposed to reach? And what I think in the work that I do, and I think the work you do as well, it's not about necessarily trying to get to the people who are deep in the bunker, because they're in the bunker. You're not going to reach them. It's the people who are left outside going, what happened to this person? This person was not like this before. What happened to them? Where did they go? And did I do it? Is it my fault? And one of the things that we do is we reassure you and say, it's not your fault. You didn't do this. This is a progression that is much easier to do now because of technology, because of social media. But it's a progression that has sucked a lot of people in before. We've always had conspiracy believers. We've always had people who truly believe that there is a power structure at the very top that is controlling the world. It's always been with us. It's just easier to stumble into now. And so I think the work of debunking, of fact checking, of books like I do, podcasts like you do, is getting to the people who are not in that world and saying, look, here is what this is. Here's how it works. We're going to demystify it. We're going to take it apart. We're going to show you what about this is appealing to people. This is going to repel the vast majority of people, but for a small number of people, it is going to be exactly what they have been looking for their whole life. And you can't get in the way of that, because you never know what's going to happen until it starts to happen.
That is the end of part 1 of this mini-series on QAnon. Part 2 will dive into the movement in detail. To find Mike and his work, you can follow the links in the episode description. For early access to full-length and ad-free episodes, please visit patreon.com/thecultvault and join from as little as £1 a month. You can also contact me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram @cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker, Casey, host of the Cult Vault Podcast.